and editor-at-large, and let's welcome in CNN legal analyst Laura Coates. Laura, if I could begin with you here. I mean, the legal ramifications of releasing what was a classified memo based on classified intelligence are interesting, particularly because you have the Justice Department telling the White House and telling Devin Nunes, don't release this, and yet both the president and Republicans are going forward.
It seems extremely reckless to do so, a word that was used oftentimes with another person we know. But the idea that you would try to undermine the investigation of Robert Mueller by doing this memo, that's what it's for. The intent of it is to try to say there's some reason to doubt, to cast aspersions on it.
But the whole Russia investigation.
But in doing so, you cut off your nose to spite your face, because you're undermining the FISA system. You're saying that it's inadequate. You're saying that there's no need to have anything more than innuendo. Evidence or showing of evidence is not relevant any longer or necessary. What does that say to the American people, that you're willing to release one interpretation of a set of facts, but not the other side of those facts, and kind of a wink and a nod to trust me? That shouldn't work. We should demand more of justice.
Shannon, it's interesting. Laura mentions Paul Ryan here. Paul Ryan attempted to sort of straddle the fence here. He said, yes, release it, but please don't attach this to the special counsel's investigation, which is a little bit rich, is it not? Because that's exactly what the Republicans are doing.
I mean, on every issue, Paul Ryan's kind of trying to thread the needle between the Republican, the divides in the Republican Party in the House and bring them together. But it has gotten to a point now where this memo is almost a circus atmosphere. You had Republicans talking about this for weeks, talking about this was going to blow the lid off everything. Democrats trying to make this counter move. The White House involved, the Justice Department. It is
Russian bots retweeting the release the memo.
It is just a circus now at this point. And to go back to real underlying issues, as you're pointing out, this is about American intelligence gathering and how we gather information. And now all of a sudden that there's this desperate dying need for the American public to know about this in a 4-page memo before a full report can be released from the House Intelligence Committee. It's just one more bizarre turn of events.
Chris, if I told you a year ago, 2 years ago, that a Republican president would defy his own Justice Department, I don't like using the possessive there, but anyway, a Justice Department run by a political appointee, that he would portray the FBI as off the rails and biased against the president and in tatters, etc., and would go around the U.S. Intelligence Committee, which is raising the alarm here, saying, don't release this. This is sensitive intelligence about, as Shannon was saying, the way we gather intelligence on foreign targets.
I would not believe you. I mean, I also, if you had told me Donald Trump will be president 2 years ago, I would also be surprised. Yeah. Look, he is someone who was elected to break status quos and norms. The people who voted for him like the idea that the intelligence community, as they perceive it, is freaking out about this memo. Now, I would say there are some status quos and norms that are in place, whether you know it or not, for all of our good. And that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Sure, there are some arcane ways in which we conduct our politics and our policy that Donald Trump sort of can cut through. But there's real danger here by just saying, well, we're just going to lop off anything that people say we can't do. He has done that time and time again. And I'll just one last thing, Jim, that laundry list that you had, one thing to add to it, the President of the United States has, via Twitter, not subtly but directly, suggested there's a deep state conspiracy working against him within the law enforcement community, led by the FBI, that is aimed at undermining his victory.
And this is just one more piece that fits into this deep state conspiracy attacks on the FBI.
By the way, this belies the entire narrative that he's a law and order president when he disrupts the way in which you conduct law and lawful activity in an orderly way.
And it has impacts well beyond, Shannon mentioned this, well beyond just this one memo, right? I mean, you're setting precedent going forward.
This is the same intelligence community, law enforcement trying to prevent terror attacks, intelligence community that's reporting back on North Korean nuclear progress, etc.
And it's not like there isn't a place to have a discussion about intelligence.
That is Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. Congressman Kinzinger, this memo causing quite a split between Republican and Democratic lawmakers. Is it your view that the public should see this? And based on what you've seen, is there anything disturbing in this memo?
I'm very cautious in how I talk about it. A lot of people have said a lot of things on the memo. It's top secret as of this moment. I have read it. There are concerning things in it that it seems like people are going to have an opportunity to see, and then they can make their own judgments. One of the things we need to be very careful of is disparaging the FBI, for instance. They're a great organization with fantastic Americans, but if there's something that comes out, if it does, that deserves concern or a second look, we should do it. And I think the good news is the American people are going to have an opportunity to make a determination for themselves instead of right and left fighting in front of the cameras.
You're very aware that the president himself is in the midst of an ongoing attack on the FBI, portraying it in very strong terms as being in tatters, as being biased. Very public comments, and other Republican lawmakers, your colleagues, supporting him in those charges. This memo, it appears, part of that broader assault on the FBI. Is it your view that this memo somehow gives evidence to that charge, that the FBI as an institution is biased against this president?
I want to wait till the memo is declassified because I'm very sensitive about talking about anything that is classified as secret or top secret. What I will say is if this is in fact declassified, people will have an opportunity to read it and come to a conclusion on their own. There are some that say this is the end of the world and some that say this is nothing. It's probably somewhere in between that, and it seems like we're going to have the opportunity, people are going to have the opportunity to read it. One of the things that I wish we could get back to is to where, you know, we could just talk about these issues, have a good discussion without necessarily arguing it, without anybody knowing all the details of everything.
Yeah,
hopefully we'll know something soon.
Sad fact, and you know as well as me that we're nowhere near that place you're describing.
Yeah.
Let me just ask you, because these are issues close to your heart. Do you believe that the FBI is institutionally biased against this president?
I believe the FBI is made of great people, and just like, for instance, in the military, somebody could express a like to Donald Trump. That doesn't make the military there to support Donald Trump. It means that people within an institution can have political opinions. We're Americans. We all have political opinions. So I think we have to be careful to say there may be individuals associated with certain things that should be held accountable, absolutely, versus saying a whole institution. I have a good friend I flew in the Air Force with that's an FBI agent now, and great folks in the FBI doing the Lord's work every day.
We're learning more about the president's speech tonight, and one of those is that he's going to make, in the words of an administration official, eye-opening remarks on North Korea. Do you expect that there will be a threat issued from the president? What is your view of the president's posture towards North Korea? And he has, as you know, in public comments, threatened military action.
Well, I think when I hear eye-opening, and I don't know, I haven't read the president's speech or talked to him about it, but I think maybe in terms of showing the American people exactly where North Korea is and the reality of the threat. And the fact that if we accept a nuclear North Korea, you by definition will have to accept a nuclear Iran and any other regime at that point that decides they're going to get nuclear weapons. You'll have thrown out the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, in essence. And so this is an awful moment. There's no doubt about it. But this is like kind of 1938 Europe, where we're sitting here making a decision of, are we going to confront this evil? Hopefully we can do it peacefully. And so I actually imagine the president's going to talk a lot about what North Korea is really doing. And so we'll see.
The CIA director you heard in an interview with the BBC say today that Russia continues to interfere in U.S. elections, and he expects very much that they will do so in the 2018 midterms. Do you believe that this President Trump, has done enough to prevent future and ongoing attacks by Russia on U.S. election systems?
Well, I think we always need to do more, and that includes the president. Part of the way to inoculate against this outside interference is to make people aware of it and to admit it, so that if you get on a social media platform and you see a news feed or a news story that appears outrageous, you now learn to accept that it probably is outrageous and not real. So I think there's a lot more we can do. I know Mike Pompeo well. I served with him on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I know he's on top of this and very concerned, and I think the administration is very concerned about it. But I think talking about this in the open and public is actually the first step to really defending against it.
But I have to ask you a question. You have a president who is accusing our network and other networks of fake news when there is actual real fake news being planted by Russia for political effect. How can the country mount a credible defense when the president is in effect, mixing charges against Russia with charges against members of the American media?
Well, look, he says what he says. I believe that there's legitimate fake news out there, and legitimate fake news is stuff like what you see on RT, Russian Today, Russian television. You see these KGB or FSB farms basically retweeting and posting on Facebook these stories, so it's a real problem. I'm not going to... Look, there's a lot of things the president tweets that I wouldn't tweet. I'm very open about that. But the first thing we need to do as Americans is be aware that when you get on Facebook or something and you see a story that's too crazy to be true, chances are it probably is.
Congressman Kinzinger, thanks very much.
Anytime, you bet.
There's a lot, certainly, to unpack with our panel. That'll be right after this break. Welcome back, and a live look now at the Dow Jones. Down, as you can see, there more than 400 points, about 1.5%, biggest drop in recent memory there. If things stay that way, it will be the biggest loss in points since Trump took office. Top health insurance and drugstores, the main drag on the market today after Amazon, JP Morgan Chase, and Berkshire Hathaway all said that they were getting into the insurance business. More competition there. Tonight, President Trump laying out his priorities in his first official State of the Union address. But hanging over his speech, developments in the ongoing Russia investigations, allegations of surveillance abuse, and the sudden departure of the deputy director of the FBI. CNN White House reporter Caitlin Collins over at the White House today. Caitlin, what are we expecting in the speech? Has the White House released bullet point details at this point?
Yeah, they have, Jim, and we can expect the president to do two things tonight. First, he's going to tout what he sees as the successes of his first year in office, that sweeping tax bill, his Supreme Court appointment, and then he's going to lay out what he hopes to get done his second year in office. Immigration, infrastructure, we can see him touch on trade, national security, but overall he's going to try to project this sense of bipartisanship and unity here in Washington, which is an interesting dynamic because it comes at a time when Washington is anything but unified, because not only do we have recent developments in the Russia investigation really hanging over as a cloud over this White House, we've also seen this fight between some conservatives and the intelligence community really escalate over that controversial memo that we're told the president is advocating for its release. And this comes as Democrats and Republicans cannot agree on an immigration solution, and the government is scheduled to run out of money again a week from Thursday, just shortly after it just recently shut down. So we'll certainly be seeing a message of unity from the president tonight, but it doesn't seem to be reflecting here in Washington right now, Jim.
Caitlin Collins at the White House, thanks very much. Here with me now, CNN political commentators Maria Cardona and Steve Cortez. Shannon Pettypiece, White House reporter for Bloomberg, as well as Chris Cillizza, CNN politics reporter and editor at large. We have, as we begin the panel, some news just coming into CNN, and that is another highlight expected in the president's State of the Union speech tonight. We are told by administration officials he's going to make, quote, eye-opening comments on North Korea. Digest that for a moment. North Korea, a very dangerous place right now. Chris Cillizza, the president has a history of making some eye-opening comments.
I was going to say.
Fire and Fury being one of them.
Yeah, I mean, Fire and Fury, Little Rocket Man. I mean, I'm interested to see how what eye-opening would mean in that context. Look, I think he has taken as sort of a mandate of his presidency, Jim, that he be more aggressive and tougher as it relates to North Korea. So, again, I'm sort of interested. It feels like you've already got the rhetoric throughout this year towards North Korea from President Trump on a 10. Maybe this one goes to 11. Right. But I just don't see how you up it from sort of taunting him and saying we're going to bring Fire and Fury down on you. I mean, that, and again, rhetoric and eye-opening is not just, it's not a policy necessarily.
Right. Well, we'll see if it's a proposal as opposed to just words. But please, Steve.
It very well could be, though. I think what this president has done, which previous presidents and Republicans as well didn't do, is use the leverage that we do have over North Korea, and that's via China. And I think this president has been pretty explicit in the past that we're willing to get far tougher with China. And by the way, when it comes to China, we hold the cards. China needs us desperately for trade. If we get tough with them on trade as a threat to get tough with North Korea, that's great leverage.
But do we really? Because, I mean, the issue with China is that China has different priorities. Right there, and you talk to U.S. military officials, and they say as much as China doesn't love a nuclear North Korea, their greater fear, frankly, is a unified North Korea or a collapsed North Korean state. And they're willing to trade little rocket man in effect for some of the status quo.
They have many interests, but nothing. The Chinese Communist Party cares about nothing more than keeping prosperity. It's effectively bribe the people, right, to maintain their power. That can't last, the prosperity and growth in China, without shipping goods to the United States, without filling Walmart with Chinese goods.
It's interesting. It's interesting because for me, when the White House says expect some eye-opening comments, I'm sorry, that is really scary. Because before, when he's had some major aggressive comments, they didn't give us a heads up. They're giving us a heads up on eye-opening comments. And this is in a year where we are as close to nuclear war as we have been in a generation. So for that to be a strong America, I think a lot of people would disagree. And just one other thing on China. Economically, the world does not think we have the cards on China, because China has now beat us in terms of global leadership. We are being beat by China and being beat by Germany.
I think it's an interesting decision, though, to be emphasizing North Korea right now. And I wonder if there's something else going on that we don't know about. Because up until this point, the administration's really been talking about how this was going to be about the economy, about security, safety, immigration, bipartisanship, looking forward.
Unifying message.
And wanting to focus on the domestic agenda and the successes this administration has had. So throwing in something that could be, quote unquote, eye-opening, little rocket man style at this point, it does make me wonder, has there been some shift or something
going on? Meaning what?
The Russia investigation.
No, but is that, sorry, just quickly, is that what you're referring to? The need for a distraction? Is that what you're hinting?
I will say this is just my perception. I have no reporting to back this up. But is there something on a foreign policy end that's going on that means they want to change their message? I mean, because there are plenty of distractions going on. The Nunez memo, whatever's happening.
Before we go on that, because I do want to move on to same speech but different topic. You heard from Caitlin Collins. There's a consistent talking point from the White House about this speech. The president's going to give a unifying speech. Crystal, can the president give a unifying speech?
I mean, yes, in a vacuum. Can he give voice to we should all come together? Sure. I mean, any of us can say we should all come together. Will it work?
Can it be received?
And I think, look, I do think there's a tendency to look at big speeches, particularly State of the Unions, as a blueprint or an outline or an indicator of where this White House is, where any White House is going, right, over the next year or even 3 years. I think that would be a mistake with Trump. And the reason that I cite that is, I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I just mean it as a fact. The past year has suggested no one day is terribly indicative of any next day. So I'm not convinced that we should see this as a day-to-day presidency.
Let him finish it, Stephen, and then Maria.
You know what is unifying is economic growth. Millions of Americans right now are benefiting from an accelerating economy, are seeing bonuses only because of the tax cuts which were just passed. And by the way, those bonuses aren't paid according to your party affiliation.
About
half of those people
voted against Donald Trump. If he used an economic message,
is truly the tide that lifts all of
If he used an economic message, just very quickly, if he used an economic message and only did that, and from now for the next 280 days until the election, that's the only thing you talk about.
But you know what? We're really
Sorry, we're going to come back to you, Chris, but quick final word from Maria before we come back.
It's interesting that you say economic growth, because this past year of Donald Trump being at the helm has been the lowest economic job numbers that we've had since 2010. And by the way, he was handed an economy already in an upswing. Thank you, President Obama.
I do want to talk more about the economic message, because I'm certain we're going to hear more about that tonight. Everyone stay with us. Hello, I'm Jim Sciutto in for Wolf Blitzer. It is 1 p.m. here in Washington. Wherever you are watching from around the world, thanks so much for joining us. As the president prepares to address the nation, we begin with new developments in the Russia probe. The House Intelligence Committee will release a controversial memo accusing the FBI of abusing surveillance rules. Meanwhile, the president ignoring legislation that he signed into law to impose new sanctions on Russia for interfering in the 2016 election. The GOP-controlled Senate approved the sanctions by a vote of 98-2. The GOP-controlled House by 419-3. Plus, more questions about the sudden exit of Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe. Our all-star team is ready to unpack all of these developments, and we will preview the president's first official State of the Union address, which promises to be a, quote, message of unity. First, though, Republicans saying that it shows FBI abuse of surveillance powers. Democrats say it is false, a total misrepresentation. they say. CNN senior congressional correspondent Manu Raju is on Capitol Hill with more on a GOP memo that critics say could actually undermine the Russia investigation. Manu, House Speaker Paul Ryan weighing in on the memo this morning. I know you were there. What did he have to say?
Well, he defended the release of this memo, Jim, saying that there were several things in there that he believes the public needs to see. He said there may have been, quote, malfeasance within the Justice Department and the FBI. He said there's a real possibility that American civil liberties may have been violated. And he said that there's a reason why they did not release the Democratic memo at the same time as a Republican memo. He chalked it up to the process that the House is undergoing to release the memo. I tried to press him on that to explain why not hold back the Republican memo and release a Democratic memo at the same time to give the American public both sides of the arguments. This was his response.
This memo that we just got popped on us yesterday is now going through that process. And I would just tell you, unlike the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee who voted to deny access to this memo to the broader members, Republicans supported doing so. And so now, Devin actually made the motion. So now it will go through that 11G process just like this other memo did.
Why not hold back?
Let me just say a few things.
Back and release at the same time?
What's that? Yeah, as Kevin was mentioning, the chairman went to the FBI to go through the memo to make sure that we were protecting any sources and methods, and we are confident that we are. None of that work has been done on this new memo that no one has yet read. But the Republicans voted to allow the rest of the members to read it so that it can go through that process.
But why not hold back?
You've asked enough.
So, Jim, the process in which he's referring to is one that has actually never really been used before in the 40-year history of the House Intelligence Committee, in which the committee votes to declassify information, sends it to the president, gives the president 5 days to decide whether or not to object to its release. So there's nothing common about this process that's being used, and not a real clear answer about why not hold back the Republican memo until the separate Democratic memo is ready to be released. That memo, Jim, the Democratic memo, has been released to the full House, but they can only read it in a classified setting. It argues pretty much the complete opposite of what the Republican memo says, but we don't know the contents of that yet because those contents are still secret. The question is, when will that be released, and whether the president will agree to release the Democratic contents, just as he appears to be willing to allow the Republican contents to be released in just a matter of days, Jim.
Well, perhaps there's something to do with the Republican majority on the House Intelligence Committee. Manu Raju on Capitol Hill covering it for us. The decision on that intelligence memo came just a short time after a surprise at the FBI. The decision by the Deputy Director, Andrew McCabe, to leave immediately and earlier than expected. CNN Justice correspondent Jessica Schneider joining me now. When the news broke right around this time yesterday, we didn't have any details on what was behind McCabe's departure. What more have we learned since then?
Yeah, more details now, Jim. A source telling us that McCabe's early exit, well, it was prompted by the FBI Director Christopher Wray. Wray had informed McCabe that he was bringing in his own team, which McCabe would not be a part of, and that it would be McCabe's decision whether to stay at the FBI or to leave. And of course, we know McCabe chose to leave more than a month before he was set to retire. And what we're also learning is that the upcoming Inspector General's report, that may have also prompted McCabe's departure. Director Wray, we know yesterday, sent out an all-employee email hinting that the IG's investigation, it did play a part. Of course, the IG has been looking into the FBI's handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. In his email, though, Director Wray, he noted that he couldn't comment on the IG's report. The expected release is in March. And in the email as well, Director Wray also defended himself as not being swayed by politics. So really twofold here, Jim. First of all, McCabe wanting to bring in some of his own team, and then hinting that there could be some information in this upcoming IG report that may have prompted McCabe's departure as well. Jim?
But to be clear, Jessica, we don't know what the alleged wrongdoing is that might be in the IG report or how serious it is. We just don't know yet.
Right, we don't know anything here. Of course, the Inspector General's been conducting this investigation for many months. They're not commenting on it. We do know, however, that the IG has been focused in on how the FBI handled the high-profile Hillary Clinton email investigation all throughout 2016. And, of course, it will come out at a crucial time since in recent weeks and months, Republicans and President Trump, they have railed against the FBI about the handling of political matters. They've pointed to James Comey's announcement about no charges in Hillary Clinton. Of course, those anti-Trump text messages, that is a big crux of the IG's investigation as well. Jim?
No question. So quite some broadsides from the president against the FBI lately. Jessica Schneider, thanks very much. An apparent complete, or some say about face, by the Trump administration on Russia. The president deciding not to impose new sanctions on Russia, even though there was a law passed last year that he signed to further punish Russia for election meddling, and a near unanimous vote in both houses of Congress that set up new measures. Now the head of the CIA says that even as the administration makes this decision, he fully expects Russia to meddle in upcoming elections as well.
Do you have concerns that they might try and interfere in the U.S. midterms, which are coming up?
Of course. I have every expectation that they will continue to try and do that, but I'm confident that America will be able to have a free and fair election that will push back in a way that is sufficiently robust that the impact they have on our election won't be great.
The administration says that current sanctions are already doing the job, that more aren't necessary. They even make the argument that they're not required by law today. It did release, and this is required by law, a long list of oligarchs and top Russian politicians linked to Vladimir Putin. The administration required by that law to name those individuals, companies, and to consider whether to sanction them going forward. Russia not happy with that step by itself. President Vladimir Putin calling it, quote, an unfriendly act, and warning that it is further complicating the relationship between Russia and the U.S. I want to bring in now Sam Vinograd. She's a CNN national security analyst and a former national security advisor in the Obama administration. So Sam Vinograd, just moments before we went to air, I spoke with a senior administration official who made this case to me about why the Trump White House did not impose new sanctions by this deadline. The official made the case that there was actually no statutory deadline to impose new sanctions, just to release that report, and that they may at any time impose new sanctions of perhaps some of those individuals that now have been named in that report. I wonder, based on what you know about the law that passed Congress so overwhelmingly last year, does that explanation stand up?
I don't think it does. I think that it completely misses the point. The point is that at face value, this looks like the president directly undermining congressional authority. It looks like he's cherry-picking when he wants to respect what Congress says. This law was passed with major bipartisan support, and he's now picking and choosing when he wants to meet congressional requirements, just like the administration has picked and choose when it's listened to the FBI or the intelligence community. I also think that the failure to disclose the names of entities and individuals that are working with designated Russian entities is just another example of the administration appeasing Vladimir Putin. They knew that releasing these names publicly would anger Vladimir Putin, and I wonder if that's part of the motivation for why they didn't do so. Now, Jim, there was classified discussions that occurred yesterday, and it's entirely possible that names of individuals and countries that have divested from business with Russia were released to members of Congress. But I think that the American people deserve to know who those entities are, rather than being asked to take the administration at their word.
Let me ask you this, because we noted that the director of the CIA, a Trump appointee, Mike Pompeo, former Republican congressman, said in an interview, as we said earlier today, that Russia, in fact, continues to meddle in U.S. election systems, et cetera, and that he expects that they will do so again in the 2018 midterms. And yet the State Department is making the argument that there's no need to implement new sanctions now because this law is working as a deterrent. How can both those things be true, that it's deterring activity, but the CIA director says that, in fact, Russian meddling activity continues?
I think it's very clear just from looking at any social media platform that Russian meddling has not stopped. There's an ongoing Russian digital psyops or psychological operations campaign against the United States. We see evidence every day of Russian bots and Russian trolls retweeting content, even this release the memo hashtag that's been circulating, because Russia is trying to confuse and demoralize the American people. That's the IC assessment. So at this point, we know that the information warfare campaign is ongoing. And we also know from Pompeo's statements that the intelligence community supports those assertions. And frankly, we have yet to hear what this administration is doing, whether via the Department of Homeland Security or coordination with state election officials, to protect our infrastructure and to deter Russia from their information warfare campaign.
Mm-hmm. And we know that there have been probing attacks, too, on election systems, voter rolls, et cetera. Sam Vinograd, thanks very much for helping explain it to us. More now on that Republican memo alleging FBI abuse of surveillance powers. We have Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff. He is the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman Schiff, thanks very much for taking the time today.
You bet. Good to be with you.
So you've been in the middle of this memo battle here. You heard House Speaker Paul Ryan say to Mano Raju there that he supports making the Devin Nunes memo public, but not the Democratic memo, arguing, in fact, the other side here. What's your reaction to that?
Well, when the Republicans moved to make their memo public yesterday, they did so because they said it was in the interest of full transparency. Apparently, full transparency only goes so far and doesn't include any minority views. Look, it makes very clear what this is all about. It's a political exercise by the Republicans designed to attack the FBI, attack the Department of Justice, undermine Bob Mueller's work. It's part of the defense strategy that when the facts are really bad against your client, put the government on trial. And here, sadly, the Speaker, the Chairman, they all view their client as being the President, not the American people. And this is the product of that point of view.
Now, I know the contents of this memo, many are classified. You were one of the few, I understand, who's been able to read it. Without going into classified material, did you see anything in there that would alarm or concern the American people?
Well, the memo itself, the House members have had access to now, and I think it's a deeply misleading document. It's based on underlying materials that the chairman himself didn't even bother to read. Now, I have read the underlying materials, and I think that what we see in the Republican memo is a terrible mischaracterization of the events. So we set out the proper events in their context in our own memoranda, which we will again force the Republicans to vote on next week. I think it's going to be unsustainable for them to take the position that they want the country only to see this very biased account. But we are hamstrung at the moment because we can't discuss the underlying materials, and even when their memo is made public, we can point out, okay, this is wrong, and this is misleading, and this is distorting, but we can't tell the public why, and that's precisely the position the Republicans want us in, but want the country to be in, not being able to vet the information. Indeed, they wouldn't even let the FBI and the Department of Justice vet the information.
You note a point that the Justice Department letter to Nunes last week noted as well, that the memo includes allegations, and Nunes himself, the chairman, in fact, of the House Intelligence Committee, did not, says the Justice Department, run by a Trump appointee and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. The DOJ says he didn't read the underlying intelligence. So you're saying you've read the underlying intelligence, and when you look at that, it colors these allegations differently?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's what we set out in the document that we prepared. It's what the Republican members don't want at this point the country to see because it pokes holes in this memorandum. They don't want the country to know how misleading their document is. But, you know, at the end of the day, this is a continuation of what we have seen from the chairman from the very beginning, and that is when he went on that midnight run to the White House and purported to present them with information he obtained about this conspiracy of unmasking in the Obama administration, it was revealed actually he'd gotten that information from the administration. And when one of our members, Mike Quigley, asked the chairman yesterday whether he or his staff had been in communication and contact and coordination with the White House in the preparation of this memo, he wouldn't answer the questions. And that, I think, is also quite telling.
I do wonder, though, bigger picture. You look at the FISA court, just for folks back home who are watching, this special court set up by law to approve particularly sensitive warrants to monitor foreign intelligence targets, etc. This court, and you're a former prosecutor, has a really high success rate, 99%, I forget how many decimal points, when they apply for these warrants. But they vary, thousands of warrants approved. I think the number was only 12 that have ever been denied by the court. Do you think there is a worthwhile conversation about the freedom the FISA court has, or how open it is to issuing these warrants to monitor and surveil people?
You know, certainly we need to do a vigorous oversight of the FISA court process. And in fact, one of the amendments that I offered to the reform bill we had a couple of years ago was to provide for a special advocate for the FISA court. I had some strong language that we wanted to see that would allow an independent advocate to essentially argue for privacy interests. That strong language was opposed by many of the Republican members. We had some language ultimately adopted that wasn't as strong as what we'd like, but it's a bit ironic for them now to take the position that, well, there aren't sufficient checks and balances in place when they oppose some of those checks and balances. But it's one thing to say we should be doing oversight. It's another thing to say that this court is a rubber stamp, or even another thing yet to say that the FBI or the DOJ was acting in bad faith. And so while I can't get into the contents or even acknowledge what the underlying documents are about, I can say that the FBI director wanted the opportunity for the Bureau to come before our committee, explain its concerns with this document, and the Republicans said, we don't want to hear from them. I made a motion to bring the Department of Justice in and talk to the entire House about these memoranda, and they said, no, we don't want that either. We just want to put out our narrative, and we don't want to be encumbered by the facts, and sadly, that's where we are.
If I could just ask you very quickly before I let you go on Russia sanctions, the administration deciding not to impose new sanctions as required by a law passed overwhelmingly by Democrats and Republicans, both houses of Congress, new sanctions for election meddling. I spoke to a senior administration official just before air who made the argument to me that actually the law did not require the White House to impose new sanctions now, just to release a list of potential targets and then apply those sanctions when they decide. Do you accept that argument? Or did the White House, in your view, miss an important deadline here?
I don't accept that argument. And indeed, what the White House has done is stonewall and slow walk this as much as they possibly could. Even the list they put out at 10 minutes till midnight, and apparently they got by cribbing from Forbes. They read this list off of Forbes. The basic underlying problem, Jim, is that anyone who takes action to sanction Russia, even though it's compelled by congressional legislation, or to criticize Russia, is, in the president's view, being disloyal to him, raising questions about the legitimacy of his election. So it's a dead end for people in the administration to pursue this, which is why only when they're forced, only when they're pushed, only at 10 minutes to midnight when this deadline comes